Welcome to another episode of Mental Health Matters. This is Tom Duff of St. Louis Counseling. I'm the executive director and a licensed clinical social worker, so I have that heart of a therapist but the mind of a businessman. I might get that on the t-shirt. I don't know. But once again, you are listening to Mental Health Matters. This is the podcast where we try to break down stigma by talking about mental health, making it comfortable to talk around the dinner table, hopefully, at some point in life and in our society. And it is May. It is Mental Health Awareness Month. And, you know, the other side when we talk about mental health, you know, a lot of people always think it's like, okay, mental health, that means there's a mental illness involved. It's like, no, we all have mental health. We all have our ebb and flow of our normal mental health. And so I think we'll get into talking about that today and just some thoughts and perspectives. And we're going to do that with one of our great guests as usual, and that is Mr. Charles Poole. How are you, Charles?
We're good today. How are you, Tom?
I'm well. And Charles, you know, communications expert, author, all-around good guy, right?
Depending on the day.
Depending on the day, right? So, you know, I was introduced to Charles a little while back by my colleague and a friend of yours, Deborah Dugan. I think she goes by Debbie Dugan, though. And always, if you want to sponsor our podcast, contact that Debbie Dugan at ddugan@ccstl.org. That's my shameless plug for today. But, you know, Charles, one of the things, you know, when we were talking, like what hit me was your positivity, the acknowledgement that, you know, life has ups and downs, and you approach each day with a positive vibe, you know, and I think that's so important in just our overall kind of just being and our overall attitudes in life. So how do you do that? I mean, let's start with that, you know.
I'll call it years of practice.
Years of practice, I like that.
You learn as you grow, and the more that you grow, the more that you understand about what a gift life is every day. I tell you, it's been a long time coming. I didn't start this way. I didn't come into the world as a positive person. In fact, I had many reasons not to be. But what I've learned over the years is that the alternative, being in a negative state of mind, always worried about what's going to happen to you, all of those types of things, it really accomplishes nothing. And the more that you put into the world by trying to give more to it than you take from it, I think the more that helps to bridge the gap between happiness and sadness in most people. It certainly has for me.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's controlling your thoughts, controlling your mood. There's some emotional intelligence involved in there as you're describing all that. But how do you, I mean, what's that practice you do in regards to, okay, because you're a working man too, right? I mean, you have a job, and every job, I don't care what you do in life, jobs can be stressful, right? So that brings about stress. Family, life, all that brings about stress. Like, what's the thing that when you find that stress entering and you're like, whoa, I mean, what do you do? What that cognitive part of that?
Yeah, it's about value for me. What value am I putting on what's happening as a role in terms of how I'm going to feel about what's going on in my life? I have a good tendency, I think, to separate what is related to work and what's related to my personal existence. I don't get them confused. It was Malcolm X, I believe, who said, I never confuse my methods with my objectives. And in that regard, I simply believe that stress is something that we either choose to be accountable for or something that we choose to peel off like a layer. And I choose to peel it off all the time because I just don't believe that there's any good outcome from it. And in my experience, I've never come across one person who's dwelled in that space for a long period of time who has an outlook that says that tomorrow's going to be better, things are going to improve, life is going to change. So in realizing that, it helped me to see that if I wanted to be in a good mood and a good spirit all the time and a good mental state of mind, I had to choose it, and I had to fight to choose it every day because it is a battle.
So, you know, and my guess is after experiencing some of that and figuring out some of those things with yourself, you kind of turned towards being an author. That started first maybe with some blogging, right?
It did.
But then you wanted to tell your story, right? Right. So how many books now?
3.
3 books.
3. It sounds more impressive than it probably is, but it still is 3 books. I'm glad that they came out. But yeah, that started for me at a time when I was on a journey that was entirely unexpected. I'd moved away from home to Los Angeles, and I was there by myself. I
And
didn't
home was
really
St.
know
Louis,
anybody.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Didn't really know anybody, and I had all this time because all I was really doing was working and traveling. And in those moments when I needed to have reassurance, yeah, you can pick up the phone and call someone, or you can email, but it wasn't fulfilling enough. So I started having to look at what was important in terms of what I was dealing with and what I was thinking about. And for the first time, I just turned to what I'd always turned to in other circumstances, which was to start writing it down. And I chose to do it in a blog publicly. And it was for me, for my mental health, so to speak, because I've always found that writing is the most cathartic thing that I can do. Some people choose to do other things. For me, putting it all down on paper, so to speak, is what I've always done. So I started. And interestingly, it became the way that I worked out everything. It did become my own form of therapy because no matter what I was dealing with or going through, once I wrote about it, I had perspective, and that perspective helped me go on.
So what would you say the theme of your books are? If someone does, because I'm sure right now there's some people listening, they're like, hey, I want that book. All right, you're engaging. So what would you say the theme of those books
Well,
are?
it's interesting how they follow a path. There are three. The first one is got a subtitle of a view of life as I see it. And pretty much all the things I was dealing with, whether it was crap or good stuff, I was just throwing it out there. I talked about politics, I talked about social, mores, I talked about feelings, and it was pretty much everything just flooding out. Second book is about hope and recovery, because after I'd worked those things out, I was on a path to where I was intended to go, I felt, and I started writing about those things. It became more streamlined because it was less about all of the stuff going on in the world like politics and whatnot, and more about my own personal journey, and that's what I focused upon. Third book is got a subtitle, interestingly, called Surviving and Thriving, because that's where I feel like I am in my life right now. But the title of the overall books are I Am My Own Cause. And that grew out of the fact that I believe that you are only as good to other people and other circumstances as you are to yourself. So you have to put yourself in a position where you're first. And then that translates into your direct ability of dealing with other people, friends, family, work, colleagues, whatever. So I Am My Own Cause with all of those different subtitles. So it is a progression toward where I started to where I am today.
And see, and for me, that connects so much into me because, I'm a big believer in know thyself, right? You got to know yourself before, and so even as a clinician, when I was doing that work or as a leader at my agency, it's like, I got to know me,
Right.
what makes me tick. And a lot of times, we see society, we see media, we see social media, all that, and, and how this is that person's problem. I wish that person would think this way. And it's like, that introspective look at yourself is so important, that journey.
Yeah. I know this much. Some people think that that is a selfish thing because why are you always focused up on yourself? Well, the simple reason is because I need to understand what makes me tick, how I react to things, what touches me, which, gives me reason for pause. All of the things that are unique so that when I step into the world, I'm able to understand where I begin. That, therefore, gives me a more objective point of view as it relates to seeing how other people are dealing with things, what their struggles and their journeys are about. But I can't do that if everything I'm bringing to the table is only about trying to figure that out in the context of myself. So I always tell people, they'll say, you're loud, you're this. And I say, yeah, I know, thank you, because I've done that work already. And once you do the work and know thyself, it puts you in a position where you're so much more open to the rest of the world, to the other people that are in it, and all of the things that are out there where perhaps you can give some perspective without it being about you, but it being exactly about them.
You mentioned the word hope a little bit ago too. And I think, with people that are exploring the ebb and flow of their mental health, or if they are dealing with a mental illness, a lot of times, they're looking for that hope, and sometimes they can't see it for different reasons, different that fog they're trying to walk through. From your perspective, well, I guess, how do you define hope? And then how do you put that into your day?
Hope for me is always about the idea that you have a chance. Not 100% all the time, but that you have a chance. No matter how small it is, there is a chance for things to improve, for things to get better. It's not necessary to have that 100% because it's like exercise for me. I hate it. But I get up and I do enough to try to keep things moving and working because it's good for me overall. Maybe one day I'll be one of those people who fall in love with it and they're out there running and not having it. But hope for me is about getting up and saying, you know what? I don't know if this is going to work out, but I have the hope that it will. And if that's only 1% of the 100, that's enough often to get me going. So I don't need a lot of hope to do what I do, but I just need a little bit. And I think that we all inherently have this ability to hope, but we have to be careful of not allowing it to become drowned out by everything else going on in the world. All the people, all the circumstances. When I am out on social media now, it sometimes is very distracting for me because there's a sense of hopelessness. Everyone has given up on everything and everybody, and they don't realize, going back to what I said earlier, that this all begins with you. What do I think about it? What do I feel about it? Do I believe enough in the possibilities of what can be that I'm willing to get up and try something different today?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing how you look at hope, because so often you hear a lot of, it's all or nothing thinking, people,
Right.
the trouble with that. But at the same time, just knowing that it doesn't have to be 100%.
That's right.
Doesn't have to be 100%. Even if it's 50%, it can be less than 50%,
Yeah.
But as long as you realize there's something there,
Yeah.
which also means, believing. I always believe when I was working with kids, if they had at least one significant person in their life that believed in them, that was chance, and at times that's, some of the kids I used to work with, that's all they had, was a person that they clung to.
Right.
And so, I think relationships too, so, when you talk about knowing yourself, then you talk about people, right? Relationships, let's talk about that. So then what does it take then, from a working perspective, a working relationship? How do we model that to other people? What is a healthy working relationship? I guess and I think that's where a lot of I see people struggle. Sometimes we do employee assistance programs and stuff like that between coworkers, and they're like, well, that person isn't going to change. That person is the problem. How would you approach that with your mindset when there's somebody else that needs to change a little bit too? How would you approach that?
Right. It's probably a little bit different than most people would go for. I'm a little bit different in my own way for many things, but I think it's somewhat like cooking. You season it, and sometimes, even though everyone is having the same dish, some people want a little bit more salt, some people want a little bit more spice. It's never perfect for everyone, so you have to figure out what you can do to make it work. Authenticity is a very important concept for me across the board for everybody, because often because of the areas in which we are, whether it's work, romantic life, we are taught that we have to go in and try to figure out how to become what those others expect us to be. There's a lack of authenticity that's promoted when what we need to be showing people is our true self so that they can see us in the context of that naturally versus us being in whatever role. I'm considered an executive in terms of what I do, and a lot of times when I'm at work dealing with people, they deal with me based upon my title versus who I am. And I always try to get rid of that perspective by being a little bit obtuse sometimes making a joke that they wouldn't expect from someone like me. I don't dress like everybody else. I bring myself to the table, and in doing so, I think it breaks down any types of walls that people put up of expectation that says, this is what I can expect of this person when I walk in the door. It's the same type of thing that applies to race. I've heard people when I walk in the door, I don't think of you as black. And I'm like, well, what am I? Because I don't know what else you can see when I walk in the door. But those things are about understanding the importance of authenticity, about not trying to be anything else but who you are. So in the workplace particularly, that means that I don't manage with this idea that it comes from some type of textbook. I don't manage based up on some type of rules that come from HR. I manage for the most part on intuitiveness, understanding people. I am in PR and marketing after all. People are my business. So I spend a good deal of time being sure that I see them, that I let them reveal who they are in natural ways and organic ways, so that whenever I'm encountering them or engaging with them in some way over an issue at work, I bring that to the table. It's not like in kindergarten, where one kid did something wrong and then the whole class suffers. One person at a time, authentically showing your authentic self to them, to the extent that you are both willing to do so, always makes the difference, I think.
I'm going to have to rewind this podcast because I really like that last sentence. Okay. So that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay. Rewind. Do people rewind anymore even? You know?
Yeah.
No.
You're going to say videotape next.
Yeah.
Yourself.
Exactly. Okay, total kind of switching gears on some levels. Mentioned race, right? So one of the things with our podcast we try to do is keep the conversation going. So, a lot of times, February being African American month and everything, and then all of a sudden February's over, you move on, And so one of the things we're trying to do also, at my agency as well, is we're building this racial equity plan and trying to, just approach race from different angles, right? So, but I like hearing perspectives, and you're somebody who's going to be open. So that's what I like, right? But communications field, PR field, being a black male in that field, what have you felt has been struggles, or at all struggles, but trying to overcome, maybe as you talked about people, when you walk into a room, they'll look at you in a certain way, or they've had 2 or 3 conversations with you, they'll pin you down, right? So from that perspective, when race comes into play, like what have you experienced in that sense?
Yeah, Tom, it's not really any different whether it's race or gender, whatever the topics are. I call them the isms, racism, sexism, whatever they are, all the isms that exist in this world. I count myself as a lucky duck, so to speak, because I was raised by a woman whose perspective on things was way beyond its time, way beyond the perspective of someone who is of the race that she could be, and that was that no matter what anyone else thinks of you, you have to be clear on what you think of yourself. It kind of goes back to that organic nature of what we began this conversation with. And so I have not had any particular struggles that have caused me great consternation. I'm aware of the differences. I mean, my field alone, public relations, marketing, folks of color are underrepresented. It's just a thing. When I look around, you'll see people who are surprised that you are where you are, referring to myself, because they don't normally see that. But I am also cognizant, based upon those lessons I got from my mom, that I am the first person who can define for people what the truth is. So therefore, don't walk into the room so much concerned about what their expectations are. Walk in the room as yourself. Because this is a family program, I can't put it in the terms that she said it, but it was essentially lift your head up and you look every person in the face and you claim your place, whether they think you deserve to be there or not. So that's how I operate. I don't let people get away with it. I call it out. I do also clarify things so that people can have a bit of sensitivity of perspective. But let me be clear. It is not just a one-sided proposition. It also involves me not walking into the room and doing the exact same thing to those people, to make no assumptions about them because of what the color of their skin is, for instance. So I let people show me who they are. I give them an appropriate amount of time, and to quote the late great Dr. Maya Angelou, when people show you who they are, you believe them the first time. And that's what I do. And then if that changes over time, that onus is on them. My responsibility is to approach it with objectivity and fairness and to expect the same from them. So I can't tell you that I've had a great deal of difficulty in terms of my professional life as it relates to race, but I can tell you that I see what I see, I know what I know, but I, from the inside out, will find ways of dealing with it in my own way and in my own terms. And I think that that's what each of us has a responsibility to do. It's not necessarily to, blow the entire situation up, but to find ways to work on it and work to effect change from within. And I think I've done that because I've worked in some very interesting places over the years. And a lot of people wouldn't say the things that I feel comfortable saying because that does grow too, Tom, out of the idea that I don't work at any organization in fear of losing the job because my position has always been the same. If the day ever comes you're not happy with me for whatever reason, because we all work at will for the most part, please do tell me, give me a couple of minutes to grab my bag, and I'll go home.
Yeah.
But if you expect me to come in here and act as if I am an indentured servant, I am not the right person for you. So that makes a huge difference, I think, in terms of it. And I will call it out very loudly, very directly, because I don't have room in my life for that type of engagement.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned the comfortability in who you are leads to a lot of that comfortability inside the room when you walk in, right?
Right.
And it takes practice. I mean, it takes practice to get to that level, right? And that diligence to just kind of keep following through.
But can I interject?
Yeah.
It's really, I think that for people, whatever their differences are, it's really not an option. Either you choose to assert your aggressive individuality and not be ashamed of it, or you let someone else do that for you. We're socialized to fit in the world.
Yep.
People who are outliers, who are different, who may not share the same point of view as people, are sometimes pushed aside because the collective group of people who are all going along will do that. You're talking here about the emotional well-being of someone. I cannot fathom a situation where I would be able to sit idly by and watch an injustice happen to someone else. I kind of am always for the underdog, and I will feel out a situation to the extent where I think that, is this because of this or this? I'm terrifically analytical that way, and I always am trying to figure out how to make things make sense, which can be challenging. And if it doesn't make sense, then that's where we get to the moral compass coming into play. And that's where we also get into the emotional ties. How do I feel about this happening in front of me occurring? And deciding then, do I stand up or sit down? I tend to stand up because I do believe that we all are in a position of deciding for ourselves what we're going to allow in terms of perceptions of us to occur, whatever the differences may be.
Well, and when you stand up also, like sometimes you're watching injustice occur, right? And if that person may not be able to explain it in a way to help others understand it. And that's the other thing I've kind of figured out too, because sometimes on the outside, if I'm watching something, I can almost objectively explain it to both sides and then they get it, But, because sometimes you don't have the words to, explain how that person might be feeling or that situation. So, you speak of that, also that term, aggressive individuality. Define that.
Well, excuse me. For me, it means that you are not trying to inject yourself into any circumstance so that there's any benefit to you. That you're willing to do it on behalf of other people and you're willing to do it as yourself, as you are, 100%. That means that people aren't going to necessarily agree with you. It means that some people are going to think that that was not, quote, professional. It's going to mean a lot of things. But when you are so certain that it needs to be done no matter what, you do it, period. You are so certain of yourself that you don't need affirmation to decide what's right. That's
Beautiful.
what I look at it.
That's awesome.
And so I often have over the years been called troublemaker, blank disturber, this type of thing. Because what else are we here for other than trying to make sure that we all get along, that we all make it, right? Why are we here if we are not trying to propel each other as far as we are trying to propel ourselves? Because last time I checked, none of us get out of here alive. So we might as well all, you're born on a clock.
Yeah.
We have a finite period of time here. Why do we spend all of the years we have together fighting one another for, this planet, these goals, these achievements, when if we all work together just a little bit more, look what we could possibly achieve. So I believe in standing up for that. And a lot of people can't stand it. But it's not my responsibility to be focused upon what they want me to do. It's my responsibility to be true to self. And that individualism is aggressive in the sense that you can't say anything which is going to keep me from being who I am. All right? If your risk assessment says that that's a problem for you, you do what you're going to do. I'm fine with that. But I have a higher calling Last time we spoke about my faith. I believe in it. I trust in it. I don't defer from it. And I have a line that I repeat to many people so often that they're probably tired of hearing it. Because I answer to two entities. I answer to God and myself. There's no one else in between. And when you get to that point where you are absolutely able to say that, it smells like freedom. And when you're free, there's nothing that stands in your way. Absolutely nothing.
Which is that feeling of freedom.
Yeah.
Think about that,
Right.
you know, and like you think about like the first time, you know, you go back when you were a kid. I remember the first time being left alone. Like, oh my gosh, whole house to myself.
Look what I
You know,
can do.
yeah. When I went off, wasn't living in my parents' house anymore. Wait, I can do this. I can, you know, yeah. So then when you get to that level, right, where it's between you and God and nothing else is in the way, that level of freedom is almost euphoric in some sense,
It
right?
is.
Yeah.
When you say, why am I in a good mood? That's usually why. Because I am not burdened by the restrictions that society places upon anyone. Now, I've been at every, level of the socioeconomic ladder except millionaire. But
Buy some of those books, people.
yeah,
All right.
yeah. But what I could tell you is this, having been Poe, because we couldn't officially be poor, because we would have had to buy another O and R. So we were just Poe. And coming up through the ranks over the years through a variety of different means and different economic levels, I can tell you one thing. The simple assurance that nothing matters about what you have, but everything matters about who you are remains consistent. Having had nothing and having had a lot, I know the difference between being happy and being able to say that I have things. A lot of people don't know that distinction. They think that happiness is going to lie within the things and the achievements or the notoriety, whatever that is. But it lies into the ability to, again, be true to yourself. It always goes back to that. No matter what has happened over the years, I've always been able to rely upon the understanding that this life is a gift to me. It is on loan in this physical body. And that beyond that, everything else is about taking this spirit and letting it do what it's supposed to do in this world for this period of time, however long it's going to be. And then when that time is over, my work is done, and I'll go home. Nothing else is relevant. It's not about leaving monuments to yourself. It's about leaving etches on the hearts and minds of people that say, this person lived, and because they lived, look at what I've learned from them, and then to pass that on. If you can do that, it's very difficult to walk around every day without a sense of purpose.
Yeah, and which all comes back to looking out for each other,
That's
as
right.
you said. You know,
That's right.
why else are we here?
That's right.
And I think, for me, that's, so I worked in the nonprofit world. We talk about mission and vision and all that, and you start breaking it down, and we're here to do sessions of mental health, to help people, but really it's about making people comfortable who they are. You start getting deep into that world, and why do we do that? When you look at business as well too, the corporate world, it's like, why do you exist? And maybe it's to make your customers happy, which is making a person better. But it's like those are the things that I think sometimes it's so far away. We end up on these continuums, and we're so far off of what it's really about, right?
Right.
And, maybe you want to call me somebody on the far left right now, but it's like, aren't we all just supposed to help people? I mean, really? What other than that? And yes, we might enjoy some things along the way, but ultimately, aren't we here to help people? And in the work environment too. It always perplexes me when people don't want to make your subordinates, the people that report to you in the chain of command, right, better and get them promoted,
Right.
or get them into a different job. And there's a lot of people like that, that are just like, they need to stay working for me because it's easy for me. If I lose you, that sucks, right? But it's like, you can make them a better person.
That's right.
You
You
know?
can. But you've got to believe that in yourself, first of all. Politics and socialization are created to set up rivalries where people don't have anything in common. All they do is fight. So if someone wants to say that you're on the left or you're on the right, that's a way, of course, to disenfranchise you as a human being. Because in politics, there is no humanity. Simply put. I mean, Henry Kissinger was the one who said, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. So it's the interest that's at the forefront. Nothing about the interest is based upon humanity. It's based upon something else. I don't lose sight of the fact that I'm human first. Human first. No matter what goes down, no matter what is said, that's where I stand. People always try to label me, but I'm like, child, you're going to have to get up a lot earlier in the morning if you're going to try to label me. I look for what makes sense to me based upon my humanity. And if you can look at some type of political party and you can think that that party represents who you are as a human, God bless you. That's not who I am. I look at what makes sense based upon my belief, as you've said, we're all here for a purpose, and that ultimately is to serve each other. And if you're not doing that politically, yeah, I've got a few choice words for you. But I don't care what you think of me. If you want to say that that's liberal or left or stupid, that's fine. On the other hand, coming to some financial things, I have a little bit of fiscal conservatism in me because I think that we waste too much. So if people want to label me for that, so be it. But here's the distinct difference. Every morning when I get up and I open my eyes, and I'm thankful for the fact that my feet hit the floor, and I look in the mirror when I'm brushing my teeth, I never think, does this party like me today? Does that person like me today? No, it never occurs to me. What I am doing while I'm going through those processes in the morning is asking questions like this. I wonder what I'm supposed to be doing today to move things a little bit further in this regard or this regard. The people I work with, some of them get me and will always be, in that boat. A lot of other people don't, and they couldn't stand the ground I walk on. But I am not going to judge who I am or how I am in the world based upon that, because that kind of dismisses the whole idea that we're here for a reason, and it's not something that everyone's going to agree with. So it's hard if you don't have a strong centralized core of belief in self and God, so on, because the world is constantly beating at you, scratching at you, tearing at you, trying to bring you down. And that's the reason there's so much noise right now. People are at all-time records, I think, of levels of depression and other senses of disconnection. We've got social media, which allegedly is supposed to bind the world together, and people feel like they're disconnected more than ever. So without the ability to look at all of that noise and then to specifically say, that's interesting, but here's where I am, what do you got? Nothing. So it's necessary to dismiss what everybody thinks is important. I was laughing the other day when everyone was going on, I've never seen an episode of Game of Thrones, and I'm so glad it's over. Because it's like, I don't care. But everyone's going on and on. But you're scrolling through things, ignoring it, because I appreciate that it's important to them, but it had no meaning to me. So you let them do what they're going to do, and you wait your turn. It's over now. I don't ever have to hopefully hear about it again. And that's how it is with a lot of difficulty sometimes. But in other instances, it's something much more important where I can't stand and let this happen while I know that things can be better. And so you inject yourself. You put yourself out there in hopes that you can do something to remind people of what's important. Every day I get up, I sit down and I post something on social media that I call Poole-proof wisdom. It comes from a variety of sources, but there are thoughts that are intended to get people thinking in a different mindset than this one. Oh God, it's another day. I gotta go to work. I got bills to pay.
Got a case of the Mondays.
Because I need more than that. Because if all we're here to do is to, work and pay bills and then die, that seems like a wasted opportunity for me. So I feel that way. So if I can help someone else to see life differently in that way, that's a win. That's a win. Not for me, for them. Because then they may be inspired to do the same for other people. And that's what I focus my energies on every day, because I'm not going to waste these days running around here complaining.
Poole-proof wisdom. Love it.
That's what I call it. Comes from my mama.
You better respect that. We in the month of May here, we've been talking a lot at a couple, I think it was a podcast even I did earlier, and then I was at a training yesterday, but talking about, we all should have our own mental health toolbox, so to speak, to be prepared for anything on a daily basis. For you, a couple things I've heard. One, for you writing, so a pen and a paper or a keyboard nowadays, is something, you go back to pen and paper, but yet the keyboard is very important. But pen, paper, the Poole-proof wisdom, going online and sharing that. What are some other things would you consider that's part of your mental health toolbox to keep this positive world going?
interactions with strangers where you can just talk for a few minutes and each find out something about each other that reminds you of the commonality that you can have with the rest of the world, no matter where you come from. That's one thing I really love. Supermarkets, I'm a talker by nature. And if I come across someone, we start having a conversation, it usually veers toward things of importance. Those conversations just speak to my spirit all the time. So that's certainly one of them.
That also helps with dopamine.
Absolutely.
Yes, it does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Other things that I think are also important involve simply acknowledging that I have what I call a family of friends. I built that family of friends out of necessity. I told you last time, of the family I was born into, I'm the last remaining member who's alive. So where the family has now moved on to glory, as I like to think of it, for a while, one of those things that I was writing about early on when I started the blogging was about the importance of family and working through issues and everything. So as each of them passed on, it was like, well, who am I going to do that with now? And that's when it became very clear that, why you do not have your physical, biological family here, family is where you make it. So I have what I call a family of friends. And, we do things together, we connect with each other, and we understand each other innately for who we are. And where I don't, necessarily say that we are in touch every day or anything, we all know that we're there for each other. So that's also an important factor. It's also about the importance of silence, meditation, and prayer. I like doing mine outside. Something about standing under the canopy of a sky, and I'm an early riser, so it's usually what I call, the period when night becomes day. The stars are still out. You are innately aware of God's presence everywhere. The birds are singing. It's just awesome. And I take that time to reconnect because it allows me to find my center for that day. It allows me to give thanks and gratitude for seeing another day. And it allows me to ask that always essential question with me: what would you have me do with this day, Lord? That's the question.
Yeah.
And then to go into the world after all of that with a different attitude other than, that's what I do not want, because I likely have more years behind me than I have ahead of me. And God knows the ones that I've got left, I intend to rock, because I intend to make this life, again, as I said earlier, about putting more good into the world than I could ever take from it, because that's what each of us has the capacity to do if we allow ourselves.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, we have been here with Charles Poole on Mental Health Matters. I think you've gave me a shot of dopamine today, so that's good. But yeah, I think, man, we covered a lot of topics. We covered a lot of good topics too.
You brought a talker in today. So.
Yeah, I know, it makes it so easy. But no, that's, it's interesting hearing, because a lot of times, we'll talk about stuff, but hearing what it takes to, put into yourself, put into your mental health toolbox, and, and the practice that it takes as well too, to be able to have that mindfulness every morning outside, hearing those birds chirp, feeling your feet on the ground, that type of thing, and being able to, start your day like that.
Yeah.
And, and here's the thing too, no matter how busy your life is, I'm guilty, I don't do it all the time, but it's like scheduling some time for yourself. I think that's so important, and that stuff you've described for yourself as well too. You take time for yourself, and I think that's a huge aspect.
Me first.
Yeah.
I know that sounds odd to people, but it really is. It's not a negative thing. It's the best thing in the world. You would have to ask them, of course, but you heard me mention that family of friends, but if you speak to those people, they will tell you, I will do anything I can to help you if we are in that type of relationship. I believe that we are called upon to be there for people when they need it. You need to have a conversation about something. As odd as it may seem, I'm an introvert, so I kind of like my quiet time all the time. So people are always a bit aware that if they are calling on me, that they may be kind of intruding a little bit, so they're a little careful. But I had to make it clear, if you need anything, you call me, we'll talk through it, we'll work through it. And that has been helpful. But it becomes this kind of necessity because you're driven to do it. You can't imagine your day if you didn't do it. I don't propose to anyone that I walk around with a grin on my face 100% of every day. But I can tell you, I am happy every day. Maybe not all day,
Yeah, not the 100%.
not the 100%, but every day. I don't tend to worry about things because I've come through too much already. And one of my favorite posts from that Poole Proof Wisdom is 100% of your worst fears you've already survived. If you're still here,
That's
you've
true.
already survived
That's
them.
true,
But yet
yeah.
people position themselves, oh, I'm worried about. It's like, what good is that doing you? Wait and see what happens and deal with it accordingly. So yeah, you get into this mind space, and I like calling it a mind space because so much of our troubles emanate from us getting in our own way because of beliefs, circumstances, or what we think of the reactions of other people are going to be. But to be able to clear the decks and say, you know what? I don't know how it's going to work out, but I have absolute faith that it will. That blows people's minds. And I've seen the reactions I get from people when I say that. I've gone through some things, that have been very difficult. Loss is a huge thing to deal with, and people bask in mourning, unfortunately. They never let go. And, I've learned enough to understand that even loss is purposeful. Even loss is purposeful. And people are like, what do you mean by it? I said, because it always teaches you something else that you're supposed to know. Quickly, I'll say this. I'd left St. Louis, as I told you, was away in Los Angeles, D.C., and wherever, and I never planned to come back to St. Louis. Never, ever, ever, ever. Okay?
Ever.
Just how
Yeah.
it was. But interestingly, I ended up coming back here because that's where work took me. And I always was wondering, because I have my conversations with God and prayer. I'm like, this isn't the way it was supposed to be. What happened here? And I never understood. Well, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, my younger sister passed away in 2014. Set of unusual circumstances, too long to go into for this podcast. But when it was all said and done, and I was sitting there at the end of what I went through, where we found her, she was in her house, unfortunately, and she had passed away. And after they came and took her away, I sat there in the driveway for a few minutes, and this light bulb went on in my head. All those years of questioning why I'd been brought back. Because if I'd not been here, no one would have thought to check in on her.
Yeah.
Bing.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
And I was like, now I get it. Now I get it. Less than a year later, same thing with my brother. And I was like, bing, there
Yeah.
it goes. And a lot of people hear that and they get very sad for you and mournful. And I tell them, I am so thankful that I was here. I served my purpose. That's the reason you have to think, well, doesn't that hurt? Well, yeah, every day it does. But you can't be a faithful person if you don't accept that it's going to bring some loss and pain from time to time.
Yeah.
And, I always am intrigued. I'm not a biblical scholar. I don't quote chapter and verse. I have a couple of, verses that I do like. But, people are always talking about the Bible, and they're always talking about all these things and these beliefs. But I like to see it in action. And in action for me means I do not say that I have faith unless I put it into practice by showing that I believe what I say I believe. That's what that was for me. So I think that you have to be very open to the idea that this sense of perfection that we think faith is supposed to be, I believe in God, so everything's going to be all right. That is not the truth. It's exactly the opposite. It's, do you still have faith when everything isn't? And I do. And that keeps me motivated every morning. It keeps me hopeful because that's what I say. We come into this world, we're living, we're having our life, we're doing whatever. What are you doing to prepare for when that's not going to be the case? That's the journey I'm on.
Yeah.
That's the focus I have. And if anyone doesn't get it, that's okay. Because you know what? With all due respect, this is about me, not about you. So if you don't come along with me on this journey, you will find your own path, and that's okay.
And to be okay
Yeah.
with being okay
Exactly.
with it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we've been here today talking about a lot of different things, enlightening conversation, and being able to, no matter who you are and what you're dealing with right now, I think one of the main things we take away from this podcast today is having the ability to, for lack of better terms, think on the bright side, and to be positive. And yes, we know There's people out there dealing with trauma, with grief, with mental illness, with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. But there's all components of that this perspective that Charles has shared today that can assist you, that can bring some guidance to you, that can bring some perspective to you. And so today, that's what we hope you take away. It's okay to focus on yourself. It's okay to improve yourself, because improving yourself and focusing on yourself makes you better in your relationships in the world. And as always, people, please take care of each other. But Charles, it was a pleasure having you today. Like I said, you gave me a shot of dopamine, so I'm ready to go into some meetings the rest of today, which I'm sure will be positive. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tom. I've enjoyed myself.
All right. Until next time, this is Mental Health Matters. This is Tom Duff, and we will see you again.
This has been Mental Health Matters with Tom Duff of St. Louis Counseling Services. Check out stlouiscounseling.org for more information.